Psychoanalysis, Synthiome not a cure. How will I live without the problem? Subject today needs some elaboration. Lacan was fond of gnomes, gnomes that have multiple meanings. Synthiome not a cure is also a gnome. Synthiome is a Lacanian word. Should I say a word used by Lacan? Synthiome not a cure has two meanings. One, that Synthiome is not a cure. It may be a point where Lacanian analysis may end. Yet, this point of termination is not necessarily a cure. So the first meaning of the phrase is Synthiome is not a cure. Second meaning of the phrase is there is a group of patients, especially in personality disorders, in some cases of addiction also, in some cases of chronic psychosis or chronic depression also, where the patient wants, towards the end of the analysis, to somehow continue with a mild form of trouble and not be cured completely. There is a resistance to curing the problem at its roots completely and forever, as though the problem has become a friend and one is not ready to let go of that friend. A treacherous friend, a friend that brings suffering, yet a friend all the same. The group of patients often asks the therapist, how will I live without the problem? And the therapist has to work with the patient towards the end of the therapy. How to let go of the problem, how to let go of the tragic holding state, how to be prepared for a new life and navigate through a no man's land after the cure and before the new normal is established. Some patients go to the extent of saying, when the symptom has become a synthiome and a mild one, they cannot take the final step of a total cure and they would wish to terminate the therapy with the result that from something very acute, disabling, we have come to a state where the symptom has turned into a synthiome. Suffering has been detached from the symptom to a great deal. Suffering has been reduced. Symptoms intensity also has reduced. And now a mild form of symptom where the suffering has been completely understood, accepted, and where there are no complaints, even though the mild symptom causes some trouble. There is a total acceptance of the price of the problem one is not ready to give away. So the group decides to live, one small group decides to live with a synthiome, a mild form of the problem, where the suffering has been detached from the symptom to a great deal, and the intensity of both has reduced. And in that state of the symptom, the synthiome, the person ends analysis. So this is the subject for today. Why would somebody who has come to therapy for a cure decides in the end he does not want a full cure, he wants a 90% cure or an 80% cure, and he wishes to live in the company of the synthiome rather than live alone and healthy. The synthiome has become a lifelong companion, and life seems lonely and unbearable in one way. It's a strange thing. No suffering becomes unbearable. Usually suffering becomes unbearable. We have a situation here where no suffering becomes unbearable, and it's a strange situation. So today we'll go into this very strange and enigmatic situation which arises in psychoanalytic psychotherapy. When the patient in the third and the last phase of therapy starts encountering this problem, and as I said, there are two groups. One group which both the groups articulate the problem. How will I live without the problem? But one group you can work with and they are able to navigate through the problem and be ready to cure the problem at its roots. The other group terminates the therapy with and moves out of therapy with a synthiome. They are not ready for a total at the root cure. And of course, we are talking about both the groups which constitute one group where a total cure is possible. There would be another group where total cure is not possible, and the therapy may have to terminate or continue, with the best being that the symptom has become a synthiome and there's really no choice of curing at the roots. So today's subject is this strange situation which comes up in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, especially in cases of personality disorders, addiction, some cases of chronic psychosis, some cases of chronic depression. So let us see the entire issue and how we can understand it and navigate it through in therapy. Synthiome, not a cure. Our everyday common sense rationale is the client has a problem and he has come to get the problem solved. That is why he is paying you. So there is no question that the client has come without a problem or the client has come to get a problem only partially solved. The client has definitely come to have the problem solved and solve it completely to its roots. That's an everyday rational we have in our mind, a very rational position. Nothing wrong with it. The difficulty being human beings in all situations are not as rational as this position is. However, in some cases it happens as therapy advances deep enough, the client doesn't want to resolve the problem completely and be free from it. This is a situation that often arises. Patient expresses very clearly and explicitly, at times implicitly, that he wants a Synthiome, not a total cure. And this creates a very strange, fascinating, and enigmatic situation. Why should someone choose to suffer? Why should someone choose that the problem not be cured at its roots? One way to conceptualize this is there is a contest and a conflict inside the individual between the healthy and the unhealthy part. A very essential description of the situation, but a very macro description. One can also describe the same thing to say that in some cases, not all cases, in some cases, we may be looking at a deeply existential and a spiritual crisis. And the crisis is such that the person wants to live with the problem for some more time, for maybe the karmic issue, maybe the self-journey issue, might be the person wants to explore the problem more, experience it more. Maybe the problem is productive in some way. We may be dealing with the productivity of pathology, the purpose of pathology. And we might see that there may be an existential or spiritual foundation to some anchors of pathology, not all the anchors. And this is a complicated situation because there is a psychopathology and some anchors, some pillars of the psychopathology are strictly pathological, whereas some pillars have an existential and spiritual nature to it. And the person can easily use the existential and spiritual arguments as defenses. While on their own merits, these issues are true into themselves. So we see a situation where partly it is a problem rooted in pure pathology, partly it is rooted in a spiritual and existential crisis. Occasionally, when the person talks about existential and spiritual things, what he's saying is true. Occasionally, he uses as a defense. Now, where do we see this kind of situation, Synthiome not a cure? Sorry. In the spiritual part, many will defend the problem as a karmic working out or as a necessity for spiritual growth or intellectual growth. And in some measure, it may be true. In some measure, it may just be a defense. Where do we see these problems? In many chronic situations, most explicitly in personality disorders, addiction, some forms of chronic psychosis, some forms of chronic depression. The most repeated statements patients use in this situation is this: how will I live without the problem? This has been my constant companion for 20 years, 30 years. I just don't know how life will be without this problem. And it's so unsettling. It's so empty. It is so, there is a unbearable lightness of a situation without a problem. The effervescence of happiness is so much, it creates a disintegration anxiety. There is also the anxiety of unknown. And it's almost like an infinity opens up, releasing anxiety that cannot be bound and fragments and threatens to fragment. So the person comes to therapy, he pays to let go of the problem but can't let go of the problem. So he pays for the therapy, comes to the therapy saying, I want to solve the problem. And in the middle of the session, he says, I cannot solve the problem. Again, he comes for the next session and he says, I want to solve the problem. Again, in the middle of it, he says, I cannot let go of the problem. And the question will be, what will I do without a problem? Because I have never lived my life without a problem. There are many who do, but I can't imagine myself to be like them. I have never thought of them as positive goals. I never thought of their states as positive goals where I should be. There is also a belief, not belief, but there is also one element which says, this is who I am, a man with a problem. I don't know who I am without the problem. All that I have done in my life is in some way related to the problem. I don't know what I will do without this problem completely. And as they say this, if they become ready to let go of the problem completely, there is a massive mourning for all that has happened to them because of the problem. All that they wished had not happened but has happened. And there is enormous pain, enormous mourning to be done for all that has happened from others and from their side related to the problem. And now that the problem they have to let go, it brings up all the memories related to the problem. And a massive mourning has to be done, which many people fear and wish to avoid. And therefore they hide behind, this is who I am, or I don't want to solve the problem completely, because they want to avoid the massive mourning which will come the moment they let go of the problem. So these are the reasons from here. These are the reasons why the person is not ready to give up the problem. Apart from habit, apart from being used to, apart from the company of the problem, apart from secondary gains of the tragic holding state, these are some of the motivations why the person is not able to let go completely at the roots. First, if he lets go, massive mourning is impending, which he wants to avoid. Second, he has to rebuild life from a scratch, because life as it has got built up has been built up in the light of the problem. And if the problem doesn't exist, a completely new life has to be built up. And the sheer challenge of it is anxiety provoking. If one lets go of the problem at its roots, then one has to be productive in the world and accept the struggle of the world, the risk of the world, the defeats and humiliations that come in the world occasionally. So one has to accept the struggle, which many don't want to accept. So these are the reasons why people wish to avoid healing the problem at the roots, a long-standing problem at the roots, and letting go of the problem completely. First was massive mourning. Second, rebuilding life, the challenge of rebuilding life. Third is the struggle, hard work, struggle, facing the pain of work, letting go of the pleasure of indolence and indulgence and inertia. Acceptance of reality, one can no longer live in the dreams where one is 10 out of 10, one is victorious every time, where life is like a video game where everything happens as you wish. One also has to let go of the manic defense. In many cases, manic defense is at work. So some pain or some anger is worked upon and converted into an exhilarating pleasure, a manic pleasure. If you accept the pain, you have to let go of this manic pleasure, accompanied, of course, by manic energy. You have to let go both of them. And there the fear is of not only losing the pleasure and the energy, but also of falling into depression. And of course, if you give up manic defense, you will have to navigate for a short period of time through some depression. Mostly mild to moderate, but some depression. One also has to let go intensity at some times, because the chronic problem also makes you experience intensity. It may be an intensity of a negative emotion, but an intensity all the same. And one does not want to lose intensity, because there is an addiction in the human system for intensity of the feeling. We want something very solid, very concretely felt in our nerves. And that intensity often comes because of the problem, especially in depression. It provides a very strong, concrete feeling, even though a feeling of gloom and inertia, but still a strong and concrete feeling. It's a dark but strong foundation. And it provides an anchor. And the fear is of disintegration anxiety if one lets go of that dark anchor. The anchor is dark, gloomy, unproductive, destructive, self-destructive, but still it is an anchor. And one needs an anchor, and the search for an anchor doesn't allow the person to give up the dark anchor, even if it is dark. One can fear the vacuum of no object if one lets go of the problem, because a problem in some way populates the object world, and there is a terror of losing that populated object world and getting into a vacuum of the object world. There is anxiety about something new, and there is a fear of not only an anxiety and not only anxiety, but also the challenge of hard work of establishing a new normal. So these are some of the reasons why the person says, how will I live without the problem? This is a surface statement. Behind that surface statement, these are the reasons. There are some more reasons, we'll get into them. One more reason can be masochism. The problem provides a masochistic pleasure, a secret masochistic pleasure to the person. Therefore, he doesn't want to lose it, because the problem leads to a conscious pain, but a very high unconscious pleasure. And the unconscious pleasure more than offsets the conscious pain. So it's a loss-making proposition in pleasure terms to let go of the problem. A person may not wish to solve the problem completely because he doesn't want to lose therapy. It's an object loss. And the pain of that object loss is more than the pain of the problem. So one wishes to continue with a lesser pain of being with the problem. The therapy also gives a lot of pleasure, or in many ways. The pleasure of holding, the pleasure of internalizing a good object, the pleasure of being heard uncritically, the pleasure of self-exploration, the pleasure of self-knowing. One reason can also be losing the therapist. And if the problem is solved, one will lose the therapist and one doesn't want to lose the therapist. So the one would wish that the problem is minimized and that low level, the problem, low intensity, the problem keeps continuing so that one never has to lose the therapist. One can be afraid of taking responsibility. Both anxious, the anxiety of taking responsibility and the pain of taking the responsibility. One may be afraid of the struggle and the risk of everyday life, which one will have to enter if there is no excuse of the problem, because the problem is often used as a shield, as an excuse behind which one hides to hide from the struggle and the risk of life and the hard work of life. So often one uses the excuse of the problem to hide, and one is hiding actually from responsibility, struggle, risk, defeat, uncertainty. Solving the problem can also mean at times, in fact, many times, one can even say most of the times, closing the split. And if you close the split, the problem will be solved, but the ecstasy will be lost. Because the split gives not only the terror and the problem side of it, but it also gives the ecstasy. And the ecstasy is so addictive and intoxicating that one doesn't want to give up the ecstasy. So one doesn't want to really close the split. And therefore one doesn't want to solve the problem. Loss of attention, affection, sympathy can be one more reason why one doesn't want to solve the problem completely. These are secondary gains. Responsibility, struggle, certitude, risk of life, defeat, attention, affection, sympathy, these are all secondary gains. Secondary gains one doesn't want to lose. There can be a reluctance to make a transition from the child to the adult to the parent. One would like just to be a child, and that is true of all generations starting from 1970s. It is only generation before 1970 by birth, those were born before 1970, that we see men and women. In generations born after 1970, we don't see men and women, we see only boys and girls, overgrown boys and girls. There is a refusal to move from the child to the adult to the parent. Most stop at the adult stage. Some don't even go to the adult stage and remain as a child most of the life. One doesn't want to get into the whole idea of sacrificing for somebody, which is what you would have to do as an adult and as a parent. One who continues to want to be a demanding child, not a sacrificing adult or sacrificing parent, because that means loss of omnipotence and the pain of reality and the pain of sacrifice. There can be a diffidence to separate from life as it was, because we get attached to anything, including pathological things. We are attaching creatures. So there's a problem of separating from life as it was. And that is seen as an object and one is attached to it. Or one is afraid of loneliness because the problem kept people interested in you. The problem kept the inner object world populated. Now there is going to be freedom, liberation, but you also fear loneliness. So the journey here would be from loneliness to aloneness, from entanglement to freedom. So these are some of the reasons. Nine. Twenty reasons. Reasons why somebody would wish to stop at Synthiome and not move on to complete cure. Let us now look at, if we are in such a situation, how do we heal it in psychoanalysis? How do we heal this pathological desire to end with a Synthiome and not a complete cure, even when one is possible? The first element in healing is analysis of the whole thing. Analysis of this desire for a Synthiome versus a complete cure. And we get the patient into a cost-benefit analysis of his desire. This makes the person see the irrationality of what he is saying. Does not necessarily make the person change his decision, but intellectually he knows, rationally he knows cost-benefit of what he is saying. The rational, pragmatic loss in what he is saying. Second element is a very profound acceptance of inevitability of life, of the reality of life. The inevitability of certain experiences which you cannot avoid, although negative, and how to prepare and build capacity for that negative, for enduring that negative experiences. The resilience, the emotional resilience, or the ego strength. After that, we get into the positive goals. A good life which awaits, and all the pleasures and the progress and the social contribution that one can make when one makes a transition into a good life, free from the suffering. We look at the return on investment, how high it is if one goes on the positive path. And this consolidates the healthier part of the person. Then we get into a revisit of the past as it happened because of the problem, and assist the person in a massive mourning and a catharsis. Massive mourning of all the pain, all the regrets, all the losses, all the if it would have been so, all of why only me. A massive mourning, very deep mourning, very profound mourning. And we then take the person into catharsis of aggression, of anger, of sadism, all the sadistic unconscious fantasies, the catharsis of anger that is blocked there. We then come to the ecstasy part of it, why he wants to keep the split open, how he wants to enjoy the ecstasy of a long-held companion, how there is a fusion relationship, a fusion ecstasy with the problem, or how there is a fusion ecstasy with a person who would go distant if there is no problem, which may be the mother, which may be the father, which may be the therapist, or a friend. And we go into a profound reality acceptance. So these 10 elements we use, and usually with this, most are able to navigate through the hesitation for a complete cure and go for a complete cure. Now, what happens if despite all of these 10 measures and all other measures that we know of in psychotherapy, we put to work and it does not work? And the patient insists that he wishes to terminate the therapy with a Synthiome, or he wants a therapy to go on with a Synthiome, but is not ready for a complete cure. And even to talk this, you have to bring it out in the open with the patient for a very honest talk that he does not really wish to go for a complete cure. And if this can be discussed, it means the therapy has been a good therapy and the person is able to be honest in therapy and discuss the irrational parts of himself. Now, what if he cannot navigate across and insists that he wishes a Synthiome, not a cure? It does happen occasionally, and in some of the situations when it happens, we can't do anything, we have to accept it. But just as we do reality acceptance, we have to make the person do a profound reality acceptance about what he is choosing, that he is choosing to suffer, and why he is choosing to suffer. So either he terminates therapy or goes on with therapy. Now there would be no complaining after suffering, because the suffering is so profoundly understood and partly accepted. Not only accepted, but actually in some sense invited. So suffering will not cease, it will come up in life, it will get discussed in therapy, and we have to remind the person that it has come up because of all the reasons we have discussed before. And after once or twice, the person doesn't ask for any repetition. He recollects all that was discussed and he accepts it, mostly with a sigh. It's a choice, and change comes in parts over time. Over a period of time, one slowly starts accepting choices one has made in parts. The choice, even though choice is made by the person to go for a Synthiome and not a complete cure, the acceptance of this choice comes in parts over a long period of time. And with that comes a profound acceptance of life. And usually the person terminates the therapy and goes to life from therapy. Can holistic healing and spirituality help us? Certain forms of idol therapy can be used certain meditative practices to overcome the object vacuum, energy healing, Reiki and pranic healing to deal with the aspect of secondary gains and how it prevents going for complete cure. Reiki, pranic healing, Tai Chi, all forms of energy healing can also be used to ease the struggle, moving into a state of no problem. Spiritually, when we talk about the journey of the self, the spiritual goal of enlightenment and the karmic element, it provides a very profound explanation, positivity, light, and the energy and hope to move across to a problem of complete cure and not be stuck with a Synthiome. So while we are stuck with a Synthiome, we still get an explanation of why it is so, and the quality of life improves if one is into holistic healing and spirituality. Either ways, if you settle for a Synthiome, even then the quality of life improves, and if you want to go beyond the Synthiome to a complete cure, that also is enabled or helped by holistic healing and spirituality. One sees life as one is navigating an ocean of experiences, and one starts understanding life in a spiritual paradigm, and that and seen in a spiritual paradigm, it changes completely the way one responds to pathology, Synthiome, and the situation of a complete cure, and the fear of object vacuum reduces, because enlightenment or a state of no thought and no object is seen as something very positive, very empowering, very safe, very relishable, not something which is terrifying and lonely. So holistic healing and spirituality can be used in different ways. These are wide areas, and one can pick and choose a few tools and techniques from holistic healing, a few tools and techniques from spirituality, and create a basket uh, congruent to the person who is negotiating the journey from Synthiome to a complete cure. Thank you.